All right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the organizers for organizing this lovely event today. Well, I will pick up a little bit on that, what Shogo started to talk a little bit about this kind of sense of embodiment, in particular about the sense of ownership. So I'm going to have a bit of a critical reflection on like body ownership illusions. And but before I do so, I will give you a little bit, so to say, the same old story. So to say, the same old story goes like this, because I think many people like who are doing rubber hand illusion experiments or body ownership illusion experiments, they use this kind of very famous quote by William James from 1890, where he said, well, it's the same old body which is always there. And the idea of using this quote is to say, well, you know, it's very hard to kind of investigate the role of the body because the body is just always there. We cannot find a way where you can sort of say subtract yourself from the body. The body is just always there. William James had, of course, a lot of other interesting ideas where he talked about different selves. So for him, there are different selves, at least like for him, 3. And the body is, so to say, the material self. So it's like the physical self. But in William James' conception, actually, the body is, or the material self is a little bit more than just the body. I think many people overlook that kind of quotation or like that part of William James' story. And by the way, if you're keen on having a historical reference for some of your research, I really, really warmly recommend you to have a look at Carl Wernicke's work, which did a little bit more than just, or who should deserve a little bit more credit than just his work on aphasia, which you probably all know. I think Carl Wernicke's ideas of the so-called somatopsyche, which he proposes is based on perceptual integration transmitted by nerves and cells, is quite interesting in the light of that, what we know today and what I'm going to talk about today. But let's go with the same old story. Let's go with the same old body always being there. That is the problem, and that was a problem until Botwinick and Cohn actually kind of came up with a very interesting and equally bizarre idea to kind of replace the body with a fake rubber hand. So most of you may have known that experiment, or maybe have even experienced the experiment, but in short, it goes like this. You have the participant's real hand here, the rubber hand lies in the middle, you occlude the real hand, and then you stroke both the participants and the rubber hand at the same time. And then at some point, something magical is happening, as being illustrated by this famous GIF here too, that participants have a feeling of like owning that rubber hand. So suddenly that rubber hand is, so to say, part of the own body. And with this, we were able to actually manipulate that feeling of body ownership. So here now we have within research finally like a tool in which we can actually manipulate that body, that same old body which is always there. So, and how do we do so? So already Botwinick and Cohn introduced like actually 2 of the 4 most common measures we are using today. One is very simple. We just have a questionnaire where we ask participants about their experiences. They have different statements. We're going to be there, look at that in more detail. And participants just rate, so to say, their experiences in specific ways, according to that, what they have experienced. We have also the so-called proprioceptive drift, where participants are asked to locate locate their actual hand. They close their eyes, for example, and then point to that location. And it has been shown that participants during the illusion would kind of point closer to the rubber hand and not, so to say, away from their actual hand. Another way is a bit scary. We're using a skin conductance response after threat. For example, if we attack that rubber hand with something scary as being seen in that GIF, of course, that was the non-ethical version, that we cannot just like jump at our participants like that. But if we do that in a bit more controlled manner, we can measure the skin conductance response. And what we see there is then, so there's an elevated kind of response to that, indicating a physiological response to the attack of the own body. And we would see that only when participants have the illusion, but not during the illusion. Recently, also some other kind of like tasks have been introduced, like a 2 alternative forced choice task, where participants have to, so to say, kind of make a judgment which of those hands belongs to them. So getting potentially rid of some of the problems which some of the other measures have. So these are the principal measures. And we have now, since 1998, so we have roughly 26 years of research which have used some of these measures, either maybe in isolation or in combination in one way or the other. And we have then, so to say, now quite a good body of evidence what we can observe. And these kind of observations led to like a set of perceptual rules for the rubber hand illusion, meaning that there are certain rules which we have to follow if we want to successfully induce the rubber hand illusion. So that feeling of body ownership over the rubber hand. So, for example, there's the issue of synchronicity, like the touches to both the rubber hand and the real hand have to be synchronous. They have to happen at the same time. When they're kind of like, so to say, delayed to each other so that they don't happen at the same time, we see actually that there's an decrease of the ownership sensation. Actually, this is like from Professor Shimada's work here, where he kind of increased the delay step by step. And you see that the ratings with increasing delay go down, indicating that after a certain kind of delay, it seems not to happen in the same way. Then there's other experiments, for example, which have shown that also the spatial dimension is of importance, meaning that the two hands have to be in close proximity to each other. So both the rubber hand and the real hand have to have a certain kind of spatial proximity to each other. When you move the hands far away, so further away from the participant's hand, then also the illusion goes down here. So with increasing distance goes down, and typically, or most experiments would have probably a distance around up to 15 centimeters. And any experiment is kind of increasing the distance between the two hands over like 13 centimeters approximately would see a stark reduction of the rubber hand illusion. Then there's also the issue of alignment. So both the rubber hand and the real hand have to be in the same position. So they have to have the same alignment, have the same orientation in space. For example, if you rotate the rubber hand, then this does not work anymore either. So we have these kinds of rules, and this is, so to say, part of our good same old story. And the idea is particularly with the spatial, with the synchronicity and the proximity, that those kind of rules really remind us of rules found in multisensory integration, where we have similar perceptual rules, which say that the two stimuli, in our case, it's vision and touch, right? That they have to have spatial, that they have to have temporal synchronicity and spatial proximity to be able to be integrated with each other, and then with that produce, so to say, a new percept, which is in our case, the body ownership sensation. So this is part of the good old story. It's a good story in many ways because it has kind of like shown to be very consistent over time. So many people have found these effects, and there's accumulating evidence that each of these factors do really matter. It's also like very interesting in terms of the kind of similarity towards multisensory integration and the affiliated brain processes. So the whole story is relatively good and holding together in many ways. But there have been also some criticism in recently, which have kind of said, maybe this is not the case. And there are problems with these kind of perceptual rules. There are problems with body ownership illusion experiment. And actually, that is what I want to jump on there. It's not necessary that I want to kind of discredit the whole idea which we have, or the observation we have shown we have discussed so far, but more like that I think the story is, of course, always a little bit more complicated. It's not just like that straightforward. Things are a little bit difficult. And I want to kind of highlight some of these issues because I think they're very important if we want to come to a coherent story, you know, that explains adequately and kind of like accurately that what we observe in our experimental data. So one of the things is when you look into rubber hand illusion experiments, that there's no standardized measure. It's like a whole mess. The different questionnaires using different rating scales, using different kind of statements, even some of these objective procedures or objective, you know, like quantifiable measures like proprioceptive drift has different procedures as well. They use different setups. They use, for example, virtual reality versus real objects. And all of that is lumped together into that what we know about body ownership. But that means also each study reports different things potentially. And we need to kind of have a look at on these kind of problems, I think. Then there are common observations we don't talk about. So when I talk about some of these issues now, these are not brand new hot topics which will shock many of the researchers doing body ownership illusion experiment. It's all known, it's all clear. We just don't talk about them. Maybe this is more interesting and news to some people who don't do this kind of research, that actually, for example, the illusion is not experienced by everyone. It's not the case that it always is the same thing for every participant. The question and response are a bit more problematic, and also the illusion actually requires time. It's not happening immediately. And all of these things matter from my point of view in our kind of like attempt to come to an explanatory framework which works to explain all of that. Let's have a quick look at the initial rubber hand illusion experiment questionnaire. These were statements by Botwinnik and Cohen used. Many people use this questionnaire still, and I like to highlight those three first statements, which are, according to Botwinnik and Cohen, the predicted experiences. So those where they thought that is stuff that should be happening inside the illusion. And there are a lot of other statements here, which are so-called control statements. So the first three statements are illusion statements, and we can divide these illusion statements in two different classes. One is concerns about like the kind of feeling of body ownership, that I feel the hand is part of my own body. And there's another kind of statement, as you see in the first two, which says more about that I feel like the touch is coming from the rubber hand. But these are seemingly kind of different kind of parts of the experience. So I think we have to look at that a little bit more. So let's look at that versus the responses when we look at that. How many participants actually have the illusion? There's not much data available, but I would probably say around 70% is my guess that have the illusion. 30% typically not. So it doesn't work for everyone this way. So here we have quite consistent. It's an old study from 10 years ago. So around 2/3, probably I would say, have reliably or strong enough an illusion that they could report. Then the questionnaire responses are also a bit more problematic because many of these responses maybe come from just averaging across all types of the two statements that I have kind of outlined now. So I did an experiment where some people have, for example, suggested you could have ownership over a non-body object, like a balloon or table, whatever random non-body object. And I did this experiment as well, and I compared it, the rubber hand to the balloon. I divided between ownership and referral of touch statement and measured them separately. And what I found, what I found here is that for the balloon, actually the ratings look surprisingly high. If we look here, they're rather, so to say, moderately high. But when we divide it between ownership and referral of touch, we see that ownership statements go down. They will become negative. If we put the referral of touch, if we look at the referral of touch, it becomes actually positive. And so if we average the two, you will have something in the middle, which could be interpreted in some way as an illusion. So we should be a little bit more careful here, I think. We looked also using this kind of approach, for example, at participants, the number of responders, and we see here as well. Here in that study, we have 50% of participants who respond to both ownership and referral of touch. So they have both, they have high ratings of both these sensations, but we have a few participants which have only referral of touch, so they don't report actually an ownership sensation. And more critically, I think more interestingly, as again, we have 30% who don't have the report. They don't report any of the illusion. We also included a visual only condition, so participants just staring for 90 seconds at the rubber hand, so quite boring experiment, but effective enough to give 30% also an illusion, meaning also here they report actually high ratings of body ownership with that questionnaire. So that's a little bit of an interesting observation here that we have some proportion of the participants responding quite kind of different than they probably should in terms of our ideas of visual tactile stimulation. We did some further questionnaire data analysis, for example, where we tried to look. We had to pool from several experiments of me, a data set of 212 participants. We pooled their data, they all did the same questionnaire, and we did an exploratory graph analysis, which is a tool coming from personality psychology, just to analyze the pattern, the intrinsic pattern of behavior of responses. The good part of the story is the ownership and referral of touch statements are actually central to the illusion. So they are the ones really dominating the network and being at the core of the responses. So that's good. The control statements are a little bit they're forming their own class, their own group of responses. So they're outside that main report of that what we call the illusion. So that's a positive news in this way, that indeed the ownership, or that what we call the ownership illusion, is a core component of that what participants experience in that experiment. Then the illusion requires time, also nothing new for people, but I think it's very interesting to look at. When we look into the literature, there are quite divergent kind of reports. Hendrik Eriksson's study from 2004 reported 11 seconds, Donna Lloyd 6 seconds. So it's quite, some differences. I reported in one study 22 seconds, and Ye reported 100 seconds. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. And the question is like, why? Why does it take so long for the illusion to arise? This wonderful study by Marcello Costantini's lab on the site here shows you actually, while they were actively, so to say, online monitoring the strength of the illusion experience, it kind of gradually increases over time. So it takes about, I would say, roughly 90 seconds to reach its maximum, meaning the maximum where participants have the strongest experience. So it takes time. It does not happen instantaneously. And that should also make us think, what is happening within those 90 seconds of time? Exactly, so to say. Then we have also, just to kind of as a side note, we compared this also to a moving rubber hand illusion version, which we also kind of do sort of based on movements. But also here, where we measured every 30 seconds, we see the maximum peak happening after 90 to 120 seconds. So that is when it peaks. And it kind of, until then, it increases over time until it reaches that kind of plateau. So, 90 seconds approximately. So that means also, from my point of view, any experiment doing much shorter could run into trouble that the illusion is then not fully at its fullest, so to say. It's not experienced in the strongest way. Taking that logic one step further, we measured in some experiments with my PhD student, Anand, the different onset times of referral of touch, that one sensation, and the ownership sensation. And this has been speculated to be the case for a long time, that you first have this kind of visual tactile integration, and that information is being used to generate this kind of idea of the sense of body ownership. But experimentally, we have not really shown that really so far. And we have seen also in this experiment actually that the touch referral is actually separate from the onset of the ownership sensation. So touch referral happens first, then the ownership sensation arises. And again, likewise, I like to pose the question, what happens from onset, from start to onset of the referral of touch, from the onset of referral of touch towards the ownership? Because I think that could be very informative to understand in our ideas here. So we have more data on this kind of onset. We did a lot of onset experiments now, and we also are devising like a new analysis approach for measuring the onset time. We're using actually something probably weird in this context, but we're using a survival analysis to really kind of reflect what's going on in our data when it comes to the onset time. And I think there are promising new insights in there which tell us that both referral of touch and ownership seem to behave differently when you manipulate spatial or kind of temporal factors, which reinforces the potential, the idea that it may be indeed separate processes which happen at different timescales and different kind of onsets. So in this way, I think I'd like to kind of propose that these are problems which we all kind of know, like it's nothing brand new. We have that all in the data, we all see that in the data. Many of my colleagues know these things are happening this way. What we don't have so far, I think, is a good explanation how and why. So I would like to kind of stimulate, so to say, a little bit to say, well, we need to maybe think a little bit more about why and how these things happen in this way. That is like what I'm trying to kind of like, let's say, start doing with you here now. Also, just as a final example, I'd like to kind of see how temporal information can characterize differences, and to highlight also the difference between virtual reality and real objects is, for example, the study here by Dorothy Cowie's lab, where they exposed participants in VR to a body for 5, 30, or 55 seconds, and it did not make any difference in terms of the illusion strength, which is, so to say, a bit different as we saw to the temporal evolution of the rubber hand illusion with a real object, because there it evolves over time. So in this way, we see hopefully here differences, and I think it's very important to characterize those differences, for example, and to also characterize the way our participants respond to these manipulations, then that what we tell people in our good old, same old story. And that is my talk for today, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for the talk. I thought it was very, I guess, instructive, especially for people like me that are not extremely familiar with all of the literature.
Wonderful.
So I'm gonna ask a question, and I hope it doesn't sound stupid just because I couldn't see the names of some of the papers. So maybe you cited there. So I heard there is like this new, like relatively recent line of research where people are like questioning, I guess, some of the measurements that are being used for rubber hand illusion, and some, and they generate like different hypotheses that are kind of aligned with hypnotizability or stuff like that, like the mind characteristics. What do you think about that? How would you put it, like in the, because you gave like different, perspectives, different opinions, going to translate, I guess.
Well, I think about this, and like about this whole discussion now, which has been out there. Well, it's a long discussion. Probably should have that maybe in the coffee break. No. Well, I think the overall effect I saw so far was with this, for example, demand characteristic, which has been published like a couple of years ago, I think was there. I acknowledge that because I think indeed questionnaire responses will be modulated by certain traits, psychological traits. So it's not too surprising from my point of view to see that. The question I would raise is like what role these traits have. If they are causal, meaning that they are actually the ones causing the illusion to happen, or if they modulate a specific response, which is, or process, which we are actually manipulating. So that is the idea between, like, is it actually multisensory integration or is it maybe demand characteristics? So I would say probably, I am not too surprised to see the demand characteristics as a factor modulating responses, but I am not certain that they have explanatory power to explain the whole thing, the whole story, so to say, in short. Thomas, so we can.
I just wanted to know if you know or if you don't know what to think about for the differential contribution of ownership or referral of touch on the perceptual.
Ooh. No, I don't. So the drift is an additional measure, right? So which has been used. A recent meta-analysis by Georgia, by Daniele Romano in Milano, they found actually that there is a consistent a significant correlation between drift and the illusion statement, but they could not make a differential analysis if it's in relation to the ownership statements or in relation to the referral of touch statements. And that is actually something which would be wonderful if we could do it, but the data and we don't have sufficient enough data to actually do that analysis, because most people, I think, or many people do, for example, just like a sum score of everything, and then you don't know actually the actual rating from some of that. So it's, we don't know. That is why I propose this to be maybe potentially relevant for some of those questions, because we may need to see the differential response to ownership and referral of touch, because that could maybe explain something. Could be.
So it would be more like a comment, but unisensory illusions are often the same for everyone, like Miller-Lyer illusion.
Yeah.
On the other hand, is like classic multisensory one, and every example of multisensory illusion involves temporal windows of integration, strength of different signals. So it's much more complicated endeavor to analyze it. And in my feeling, no one wants to take out all factors and do like the decent analysis. Like it will be super very expensive, let's say even. But when I see your talk, I think that if you like phenomenology, even the classical perspective of synchrony, which experiences go together, like the referral of touch and body ownership, do they have to be in the same time or no?
Yeah.
And the diachronic perspective, so which experience go one after the other, if it's fixed order, so it can be like umbrella maybe perspective.
Yeah, that would be a good approach to kind of look at these statements, look at these observations in this way, I think. And I think, in general, I agree, like, any multisensory, like how to say, now the rubber hand illusion is not necessarily much different than any of the other multisensory illusions, I think. Also, if we look at, like McGurk illusion or whatever, they have similar response pattern. Not everyone has it. Like, again, like, a fraction doesn't have, there's an onset issue, blah, blah, blah. So it's not unique to the rubber hand illusion, I would say. But I would like just to point out that if we should maybe use the knowledge we have and try to understand this heterogeneity in the responses, and then we can see what is left, so to say, for demand characteristics to explain or for multisensory integration to explain. And that is, I think, where we should be heading to, I hope. That would help us to understand more thoroughly what actually is really happening in the rubber hand illusion.
Also, the universality of illusions, it's clear for unisensory illusion. Other multisensory illusion, similar to the rubber hand illusion. So it means maybe some type of art, so rather sensory modality specific individual different.
On the slide, you have these, yeah, not quite all, thanks. On the slide, you have these colors, right? I didn't understand what they were. I wanted to know if
Which light?
if when you have one of your last ones with this, not this one.
This one, yeah, I have not done. Like I just here, this is sort of say a temporal asynchrony. We are using increasing temporal asynchrony, and we measure the onset. And here we sort of say showed sort of say the using a survival analysis, the kind of probabilities of when something is going to happen approximately. The interesting thing is that with the rubber hand illusion, with this setup is ownership seems to have, so to say, an effect after 250 milliseconds, meaning if there's a delay between the two touches of more than 250 milliseconds, there's a sharp jump that the illusion is apt to occur less and slower. When we do this for the referral of touch, we see here quite gradual kind of like with increasing delay, a gradual decrease. So very, so to say, like, you know, very kind of like nice step account kind of going down, but not for ownership, which means the way these two experiences react to temporal asynchrony seems to be slightly different. That's what we're trying to tease apart. Yeah, that's the asynchrony between the two touches.
So you have rubber hand without asynchronous, synchronous, and nothing, right?
Yeah, like visual only. Yeah.
So it's asynchronous block just change.
Say it again.
Synchronous stimulation enhances it, right?
Yeah.
I want to know if asynchronous stimulation reduces it or doesn't.
That could be in some studies the case that it actually leads to a decrease in the actual ratings.
Compared to no stimulation.
Yeah.
One naive question.
Please.
So there was a difference between the sense of touch and ownership. And then I wonder if there is any study that relates the ownership and something the agent has to kind of protect or kind of save from with some disturbance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you mean like an attack to the hand or what? Or
Yeah, so I wonder if there can be the kind of ownership, sense of a feeling of ownership can emerge if the thing is not the something the subject has to protect from others, like the rubber hands.
Yeah.
Because the rubber hand is something the subject feels like to protect from the fall, and but balloon, no, that's okay because it's not the harm things to be done to himself or herself. So I feel it feels like there is the sort of like what I say the subject has to protect that thing not to be harmed by something. If the reason to have such kind of ownership, so those kinds of quite.
I think we should probably move on, but I'm happy to answer your question like after that. Yes, in short, I mean, the whole idea is that some of these processes, multi-sense integration to create this body ownership could be maybe rooted in this kind of need to be able to identify your own body and then be able to say, well, I know what my body is. And with that, I know what is threatened or not, so to say. I think this has been made as a claim, so to say. But I mean, this is like sort of a bit evolutionary speaking. But yeah, that's an idea. Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah. So if some subjects is illusion giving asynchronous or non-stimulation, how to explain it.
Probably the best way to explain these could be using temporal binding windows. Like, I mean, that has been shown to affect like the illusionability, if we want to say so. So, for example, some participants may see not the temporal asynchrony between the two events, and then for them they happen more or less synchronous, so to say, subjectively speaking. And in this way, this could then mean for those participants, visual tactile integration and potentially that ownership could be also happen in the asynchronous condition. So I think I think this idea is very interesting, and it was very good to follow to kind of understand these potential differences, how participants respond in sync, async, why do they have it in sync and not in async, why do they have it in async? Could be very interesting in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.